He wasn't talking, Mummy. I tried to tell David. And I told Tanya he's not talking, that he needs to see the doctor. And they wouldn't listen, Mummy. And I tried to put the water in his mouth, but it was bleeding too much, Mummy. He needed the doctor, Mum.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this special podcast, which I warn you is confronting in its content and may be disturbing to some. I make no apologies for the content, as it's both true and it deals with the subject of child abuse, which this country has a major problem. Hello, I'm Mike Bain, and I want to start off with a true story which unfolded when I was working for the news media outlet Stuff. There we were, in the editorial room, my boss and I, working hard in the office, when our peace and tranquility was broken by the sound of a young girl screaming. A quick look out the window was all we needed to see something was amiss. The girl was being dragged against her will by a man down the street. We went outside and confronted this man, who told us in no uncertain terms to mind our own business, as he dragged the girl into a property, still protesting. So we called the police, and they did turn up. They later reported back to us all was well with the girl. Turned out she had a mental health condition and had become uncontrollable at the school just up the road, and the man, who was the girl's father, was called to retrieve her. But the incident had raised some eyebrows into the father's handling of what had become an awkward situation, and it was suggested that maybe an apology to us might have been in order. Well, we didn't know, but then, if we did, would we have ignored the incident? I think the answer would have been maybe. How about you? If you see a mother who's obviously exasperated in the street or even next door, dishing out a form of discipline you don't agree with, but do you say, hey, that's not my concern or my business, and do you turn away? Growing up, I was taught if I was to make a stand on something important, to do it because I believed it's the right thing to do, and I was told to make sure I carry it through. A few years before the incident, I covered the outpouring of anger in this country at the death of Moko Rangito Hereri. Let me share with you the treatment this 3-year-old received, as reported by Stuff, following the trial of his killers. And I give you a warning, the following content is graphic and very disturbing, but I ask you stay with me. 2 months earlier, in June 2015, Moko and his sister were left in Taupo under the care of Tanya Shaila, while his mum, Nicola Daly Paki, tended to a sick child at Starship Hospital. Now, Shaila was a woman already struggling to care for her 4 children under 7, and she suffered from a borderline personality disorder with self-harm tendencies and mood swings. A few weeks later, her boyfriend, David Hariwa, just out of prison and with a history of family violence, arrived in the home filled with young children. Hariwa managed to avoid detection when the Maori Women's Refuge and the wardens from the Children and Young Families Agency visited, and he became a menacing presence for the final 2 weeks of Moko's life. Continually missing the opportunity to act on the many red flags alerting them to the problem, these authorities left Moko to live out his final weeks in a living hell. In the 4 days before his death, he was repeatedly thrown to the ground and slapped and kicked about his face and body. He was struck on the face with a jandal, cutting his lips and cheeks. But Moko was repeatedly be thrown to his bed, a mattress on the ground, and be stomped on his back. Locked in his room, he continued to soil himself, which was again rubbed in his face by his abusers. Their clean-up was so rough it pulled the scabs from his body. They covered his mouth to muffle the screams. Barely able to see through his bruised and swollen face, little Moko pleaded for water, but his killers refused. Instead, the 3-year-old was locked in a room to spend the final days of his short life at the mercy of abusive caregivers who dished out constant and severe beatings which left Moko unable to walk and incontinent. When Moko soiled himself, his abusers rubbed his face in it, then washed it off with such force it ripped scabs from his face as he screamed out with pain. His cries were heard by his then 7-year-old sister, who would hide Moko in closets or sneak him water to shield him from his nightmare. At one point, Moko collapsed in the bathroom. They picked up his motionless 3-year-old body and dropped him to the ground face first, again and again. The day before Moko died, he could barely walk from the beatings and kept falling to the ground. He was defecating and vomiting frequently, but was given no care. The final blow which caused his death was a brutal stomping on his chest and stomach. Two children who witnessed Moko groan and expel bursts of air from blows they described as really, really hard. Thousands of New Zealanders of all ages were united that there be justice for Moko. A baby is murdered. We'll march, we'll protest, we'll take to Facebook and we'll use capital letters to condemn their actions of the perpetrators. Then the court will hand down its judgment. Then the calm comes. But danger still lives here. Our babies don't need us to march. They don't need us to scream when they die. Our babies need us to give a damn when they're alive. You know, Moko was one out of hundreds of children who have been fatally abused by their mothers, fathers, stepfathers, uncles, aunties, stepdads, stepmums, brothers, sisters, family, friends. Hey, you get the picture. If you're a solo parent looking for love, be sure you really know who it is that's getting into your bed. We talk about abuse, but as I researched into it, how they died, I'll tell you what, it'll break your heart. Strangulation, suffocation, blows to the head by fist, claw hammers, sledgehammers, drowned, some were dropped from heights, stabbed, beaten, starved. One had their throats cut. I'm not going to go on. Some of the other names that we were incensed with was James Whakaruru, Nia Glassy, the Kahui twins. These are the names of the children who caught the attention of the media. But what about the hundreds we don't hear about? Child abuse is not limited to one ethnicity. Doesn't matter if you're brown, black, white or yellow. It doesn't matter if you're rich, middle income or poor, whether you're a beneficiary, whether you're religious, educated or not. It doesn't matter if you live in Huntly or Henderson, Porirua or Ponsonby, Timaru or Taihape. Child abuse is around us. There are so many victims, it's heartbreaking. Just watch the news each night and abuse comes in many forms. Each night we see more cases, some current and others historical, coming to light, brought by those who have found the strength to call it out for what it is. Some cases are outside of the home. Institutional abuse is brought about by the predators who find their way into schools, community groups, state care facilities and religious institutions. In these situations, some institutions know it's happened, but they've opted to cover it up. So let me ask you the question. If you march for justice for Moko, how do you feel every time you hear of another child fatally abused by those who are supposed to be taking care of them? If you stood up for justice for Moko, how about standing up for these kids who suffered and died? Kids you probably never hear of, like Kristen Armstrong, Khan Edwards, Bailey Kaneta, Sapphire Skipper, or how about Ash Miller? We stand up for so many things today, things like co-governance, the rights of the Archie speckled frog on the Coromandel, climate change, freedom, inclusivity, the rights of the individuals. Man, look, we'll even stand up for the war in Ukraine. But none of that matters, does it? Gandhi said the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. In many cases, there's been no justice for these children. Many family members and neighbours and friends, they knew that things were not right and they will confirm it to the media after it's happened. Other individuals and institutions knew and still know, but choose to remain silent. In the case of Mako, those agencies who were involved at the times missed some vital signs, but their job is unenviable. For them, it's a no-win situation. Regardless of whether they missed the signs or acted, they face an avalanche of criticism from the community when they do or they don't act. Yeah, hindsight's a great thing. There are calls to force those who remain silent in situations or face a joint charge on whatever is proven. Many times we hear the cries and many times we turn away, but we shouldn't. Connection is key to saving our children. If we have a gut feeling about a child in danger, don't just say something, scream. If we think something is wrong, don't march with a crowd, march to that house, annoy the police with your concerns and scream your anger. People, we need to stop reacting when a child dies and start being proactive when they're alive. This is a community problem, a family problem, our problem. We live in a society where we care for our own, and the responsibility of other people's children is not ours. But when a child dies, we are willing to pull out our prams, strap on our runners and march. But it's evident that our attitudes are marching, our protests, they don't work. Getting angry collectively after the fact is not working either. But hey, we might sleep easy. We've done our job. We march today. But if you stand for something, make sure it's something you believe in and follow it through. Many stood for justice for Moko, 3 adults convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to a 17-year prison term with a minimum of 9 years. But what about the other kids? Friends, if this podcast has pricked your conscience in any way, if you suspect something, see something, do something today before it's too late. You may ask, why am I mentioning this on a Christian platform? It's simple. Jesus said we must be the salt and light in the world. Not only must we bring our own children up with love and in the image of God, but we must ensure that we add salt and light into the discussion. We must raise our voices in opposition to the things which are not right, hurting others. We must make a stand for all the innocents whose voices are muted by violence. We cannot stand by and watch families be destroyed as evil advances. Our society is only as strong as its most vulnerable members, and the lack of response to those needs of those most vulnerable members will have a great repercussions for the overall culture of New Zealand. Your inaction makes you just as culpable. So let me leave you with this thought from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act.
I knew it's my fault, I knew all of that. You know, I killed my son. Now, there's nothing to it, that's it. It's my fault, simple as that.
More than 200 New Zealand children have died of neglect, maltreatment or abuse since 1992. On average, that's 9 children every year. Most of these children will have died of head injuries at the hands of their mother or father. In 2015, the child victim toll was 14.
The day she was buried, I went home alone. That's when it hit me. That's when I realised that she wasn't ever going to be there again, that I'd never hear her voice, that I'd never get to cuddle her or watch her grow up.
You read the detail of what happens to children, and we know it's at an epidemic proportion in our country.
Then he had stab wounds all over him. Simon just had it around his head and body.
I want them to have a voice, and I want their voice to be heard.
It was like a part of all of us died. We had a perfect home for him, love and everything, and you know, to be taken away, to go back to his biological mother and that to happen to him, you know, just devastated, still devastated.
I felt concerned that so-called policymakers were looking at the problem through a closed lens.
I poked around and opened the boot of the car, and here were these 2 dear little souls cuddled up in the back. There was no more I could do. I just completely saddened by the fact that someone could do that to a child.
Good people, really good people, social workers, were not receiving the comprehensive training which they should have been receiving.
It's hard. Yeah, very hard. All I can think of is that all these people got to stop hurting their kids.
New Zealand remains one of the most dangerous countries in the developed world in which to grow up.